where you're, well, the Chaudron idea Kushan's talked with me about is basically a 21st century version of the 8th Air Force's campaign where you're bombing targets throughout Germany and presumably France as well. And it was going to be a long-form, long-lasting one. Basically, the problem I was thinking that you could have, and this isn't just in game terms, but is realistic, is that one side would gain air superiority and then just spend the week or so pounding the other to rubble and then pounding the rubble into smaller pieces of rubble.
Yeah, that's definitely definitely an issue. That I've already kind of foreseen, and one of the things I actually worry about is, how do you prevent that sort of slide? The other thing I see with like a long form scenario is like downtime. It's going to take a real kind of balance, to balance just kind of ready times, because potentially, if you don't have those ready times balanced, you can just, there can be a lot of downtime for the player, I guess is what I'm trying to say.
Yeah.
Player launches, all their strikes, for the day, and then everything comes back and has 6 hours basically until the next wave is ready to go.
Or 20 or 10, because if you're on sustained ops, which you should do for realism's sake after a few days. But yeah, I know that feeling of downtime.
It looks like my F-16s. Looks like I wasn't paying enough attention, and the German Air Force responded and is about to pounce my my harm-equipped, or is pouncing my harm-equipped F-16s that were going after enemy radars. So they're definitely defensive. Looks like I've lost one so far. Looks like I just lost a second. Hi Bedrock. Yeah, it's definitely been a while since I've streamed. Work has been crazy, and just life in general. It's been on weekends that I haven't been working, it's been really hard just to kind of work up the energy to stream, but hoping to get back into it. Something I've definitely missed. All right, got to get this guy out of here. Yeah. So any questions from chat on scenario design? Things you guys like to see? Questions about just setting things up? All right. This isn't going. I'm finding it really hard to actually talk and actually play at the same time. I'm kind of getting myself pounded on my own scenario here. Not a good sign.
That happens to me too when I'm making my hard scenarios. I've gotten pounded by my own scenarios too.
I think
especially if
Sorry, go ahead.
Oh, you go first.
I was going to say, I think that's kind of a good sign. I kind of like when I lose at my own scenarios, because then it means that, I made it difficult. I always, one of the things I always fear is that I made a scenario too difficult or too hard. Did I get the force balance right, that it's just, one side running over the other? I mean, what's your kind of opinion on that, Clay? Or do you struggle with anything like that?
Well, I tend to make scenarios too easy in that relative sense than too hard. But that's just me, because I sort of like playing when other scenarios make sort of simpler pick up and go for a short time scenarios, and that's the kind I also like making too. Any recommended Lua tutorials for scenario design?
Go ahead, Coiler. I'll let you talk first. I think we're probably going to say the same thing, but...
You can go, Kushan.
I was going to say Tomcat's tutorials. If you give me just a second. It's a good intro. It's not too complex. Let me see if I can find the link for you, Bedrock, while I'm watching my planes get massacred here. Let me see. I think it was Tomcat who did it. Maybe it wasn't. I think they're linked on the forums. Let me look there.
I also did a text tutorial of sorts for Belugin's blog, so I guess I can post that in the chat too. It's a sample and text one. I just posted it in the chat.
Um, there is one that really helped. Oh, I know where I saw it. It's Belugan's Wiki. It has been a while since I've actually looked at. Unfortunately, like I learned, I learned Lua by one having somebody basically write a lot of the Lua code that I use for like randomization, um, and then not really understanding it, and then kind of being forced to understand it in order to actually use it.
Yeah.
CK Finit also did some tutorials as well, but those weren't what I was looking for. I thought somebody has done tutorials, but I seem to be having an issue actually finding them. If you give me just a couple minutes, Bedrock, I can definitely find you something. Let me, actually, it looks like I actually have to get my, actually get some fighters up. Actually, a real fighter force up. I've got a whole swarm of German Eurofighters and Raphaels that seem to be preventing me from really, going in too far. So I'm just gonna do what I should have done, which is kind of launch a. The thing about this scenario is that it's 8 hours long, so it's not a whole lot of time to kind of sit here and kind of tiptoe. You kind of have to, I feel like you kind of have to just go for it. Um, be that as it may. Yeah, Stardog, that was me. I did do Iran Strike. Although I have to admit, it's a scenario I would like to get back to and revise. Speaking of revising, Coiler, are you like a fan of like going back and revising old scenarios with basically new tricks as new things are added to the game?
I would like to more than I somehow get the motivation to actually do. Like, I should go back through all my old scenarios and see how, if game updates have kind of changed them for out of whack. But it seems more like a kind of maintenance thing for just seeing what's wrong than just trying to update purely for the sake of making newer ones. I think what I would most prefer doing is do another scenario that's sort of like an in-universe follow-up to the same one in the same time period, and that takes advantage of the new features too. Um, Sort of like the best of both worlds in that sense. I don't know. That's just how I feel.
Um, yeah, I mean, I've actually thought about going back to my first Cauldron scenario. Kind of looking back on it, there's a lot of things I really don't like about it. Um, for those that are unfamiliar with it, my first Cauldron scenario, let's just Zeus Marine, was you basically controlled U.S. and U.K. subs hunting for French boomers. It's kind of the C component to this scenario, um, and takes place about at the same time. One, I've actually changed the dates. The original scenario was set in 2018. I kind of moved it to 2020. Just because there's some kind of new tech goodies that kind of come out about 2020 that'll make things kind of cooler. Um, so I need to go back and kind of revise that for that. But just some things with the Lewis scripts I didn't like. I didn't like how there was already some allied subs kind of already in the patrol zone when you started. I think I'd much rather have it like the player subs in the patrol zone and then like reinforcements arrive later, even if they are uncontrolled. Just kind of design things like that I didn't really like. For like a Rand strike, it was really my first big scenario, and it wasn't even really designed to be played by anybody else. It was something I kind of shoehorned in afterwards, um, meaning that I really set it up just to basically be played on the stream, which it didn't really have a whole lot of AI, which is basically me kind of, playing both sides, so to speak. Um, So there are some things there. I kind of feel like I overdid it on the U.S. force deployment on that one.
Mm.
And I'd also like to kind of explore kind of a post-sanctions Iran, which I could do within the same scenario using Lua without too much difficulty. and see how they would do, with S400 batteries, for instance. Other air war type scenarios that you would recommend?
Air wars in like no naval element, I presume.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Stardog 765. Are there any air war only type scenarios out there you would recommend? Personally, my favorite, I think, is one of the Northern Inferno scenarios where you kind of control a U.S. carrier group up here in the Barents Sea. I don't think that one had any land strike component to it. I think it was just a defense mission. I can look at it real quick. Start menu.
Yeah.
I'm not actually going to start a new scenario. It was called Fire and Brimstone, I think, is the scenario. This is probably one of my... no, that's not Fire and Brimstone. Where was it? I want to say it was Fire and Brimstone, but... Or no, maybe it was Fox 2. What scenario was it? Maybe it was Fire and Brimstone. It was basically you controlled... Yeah, now on station, you controlled the Saratoga and the Kennedy group up here in the Barents Sea. And I didn't think this one had a a land strike component, but I really loved playing with like early generation F-14s versus Badgers and backfires.
Yeah.
It was kind of the dance of the vampires, but not dance of the vampires, in that it was a lot closer. The ranges weren't as far.
My favorite air war scenarios are probably randomizers, nuclear war ones, like Deter, Detect, Defend, the awkwardly named Wargasm 1962, and Peeling the Onion, his most recent one, simply because they're nuclear bombs, so the stakes are incredibly high.
Looks like I had a little bit of an issue here. Apparently going to that kind of looked like it cleared out my player state. There we go. Now we're back. Yeah, I never actually played Wargasm. I think I might have opened it up once for the stream, but I'm not really a huge... Which funny is that Wargasm was an actual is an actual concept and was an actual term.
Yes.
As an operation, which I just find hilarious. I just don't really find those nuclear war scenarios all that fun. I never really played even the last Northern Inferno scenario all that much. Call it maybe striking a little too close to home with the current kind of political, climate.
Yeah, that and the fact that it's precisely because it's a final nuclear apocalypse, that sort of thing. So, but yeah, for the sake of that, but yeah, I certainly, it's, if nothing else, it's sort of like, wow, boom, that they have that genuine effect. So that's my choice for air-only scenarios, is those nuclear ones.
Yeah. Like, what's your opinion of like the Northern Fury scenarios? I've heard great things about them. I hate to say it, I haven't actually played them.
They're excellent. I think most of them, like many of the bigger ones, are basically early 90s World War III against a surviving Soviet Union, which means in practice it's 1980s World War III, except you have a few AMRAAMs. But I also like how it has... I like how it's more than just backfire regiment versus carrier group versus backfire regiment versus carrier group. There's like some of the more recent ones are like small unit actions in the Norwegian fjords, and of course the big convoys. So I like how it's both a classic 1980s or 90s World War III and some new, more experimental, let's see what this can do unconventional ones, and I like that a lot too.
Um, so Bedrock 459 says he's running off of Steam now. Does he have to subscribe to the community pack? Does he need to subscribe to every scenario individually? Um, I unfortunately can't answer that, Bedrock. I have the Steam install, but I mainly just use it for the very rare occasion where something in the beta needs testing with it. Mainly when we were trying to like get the Steam functionality, kind of making sure it was working. So I really don't use it. Clover, don't you use the Steam version?
I use the Steam version, and but for the most part, I just use the community pack put inside manually put inside the folder. So I do subscribe to a few scenarios in the Steam Workshop, but they're just on an individual level. So I haven't tried subscribing to the whole pack. So I would say just try subscribing to the highest numbered one, and it should it should work. So that's I'm not sorry, I'm not the best person to answer that question either.
Yeah, sorry, Bedrock. Wish I had a better answer for you. Um, I just find, especially with Steam kind of being kind of finicky about auto updating at times. I really don't like that. I like being able to control when my game updates. Especially doesn't really affect scenarios too much. It's not like say a Skyrim where if the game updates it'll break your game. But I just like being able to kind of control that, especially for like DB purposes. Um, all right. Well, I got F-15s returning to base here. I have an angry horde of German Eurofighters that are coming after me. So something that was recently up on Belugin's website is ComSubPack wrote an excellent article, I think, about basically German kind of like readiness, levels. Um, and if you haven't read it, I would go back and read it. Kind of basically gives kind of an overview of kind of German availability and all of that. And I thought it was a really well wrote article. But something I wanted to ask you, Claylor, is do you pay attention to like real world readiness, in your scenarios? I mean, do you say, all right, so say Germany has 100 Eurofighters, but 50 are actually operational, but only 25 could say are actually combat ready.
Well, to be honest, not really. Um, and I kind of use a narrative explanation for it, which is that in a scenario like this, Chaudron, where I just use the excuse, which may not be the best excuse, but it's still an excuse for gameplay of, well, they have time to rev up their spares production and get it to a full-blown war footing that's higher than their real peacetime readiness. So I can just use a more realistic, like 70 to 90% readiness for the fighters as a whole, and the and then just sort of hand wave aside the real ones. I would use the real ones if I was doing a scenario where it's a surprise of some kind and you have to get what you have quickly up and running. And that's basically it. And that's basically it. But for most of the times, I kind of favor gameplay narrative over 100% pure realism in that sense.
Oh, sorry guys, I had my mic muted to take a drink and I completely forgot to turn it back on. I'm really sorry. Um, oops. Sorry about that. Can everybody hear me now?
Yes, I can hear you again.
Yeah, Hugh. I always seem to do that. I mute the mic so I can take a drink and I forget to turn it back on. Um, I was actually asking Claylor, what speaking of like no nav zones and such, how much do you plan for like a player, doing the unexpected? Like in mine, I added these exclusion zones basically to kind of narrow a player, coming in from a certain direction, figuring that if a player wanted to go like all the way around Spain and essentially come up, on the backside, um, to strike, that was beyond what I was going to plan for. Um, do you take stuff like that into account? Like the player could do this, but it's kind of outside of the realm of possibility.
Well, I would again say it depends on the context of the exact scenario. I think I tend to be more open minded. Like, I don't want to have what you see in a lot of other games that are a lot more linear. Like, you have to do X to complete this and only X, and that's the way you do it. So get good at wall jumping, or that example. But a lot of times I will use no nav zones, especially if there's a background political reason for them, a good political reason for that too.
Yeah, Bedrock, I think I might have been muted when I was giving the explanation. Yeah, these are no nav zones. In the book Chaudron, by Larry Bond, which the scenario is kind of roughly based on. I think it was Belgium was actually neutral, and I think Netherlands was neutral, and Belgium was actually part of their variant of the EU, but they weren't really happy about it. So in my scenario, I decided to and Denmark was neutral, so I kind of put no nav zones there. One for kind of a storyline thing, and two, it kind of narrowed the player down into certain kind of ingress routes to their targets, which made it a lot easier to kind of set up missions, especially since the that doesn't apply to the French forces. They can fly through these areas without and they can fly through these areas without any hiccups. Um, all right, so I lost my AWACS. I didn't actually, these guys' prosecution zone actually ends in the middle of the channel, so I'm kind of surprised that my AWACS got taken out. Although it's kind of great to see when the game kind of surprises me like that. Um, and it looks like my next AWACS will be airborne in about 19 seconds from Milton Hall. Um, and well, at least something good came of my little decoy, in that I have better fixed locations on the enemy SAM systems. So looks like I got a Mamba, a Patriot. That's gonna be annoying, and or two Patriot batteries. That's gonna be super annoying to deal with. Um, Although something I did find out about the Patriot is that they actually have like even though their radar is 360 degrees, they're actually a fixed like engagement angle. Um, I got around that in this scenario by randomizing which way they're actually facing. So that way they could potentially kind of cover, a 360-degree, one set of angles. But I just never knew that about the Patriot. I always figured it was kind of, I always thought it just kind of rotated, but I guess not. So I got an angry horde of Eurofighters over here. Just kind of waiting for the rest of my fighters to kind of come airborne. Um, really kind of wish there was like a 2-second time compression. I always feel like, especially on stream, that like 5 is too fast sometimes and like 1 is too slow. Just kind of going through chat here. Give me just a second. Sorry, I had a cough there. So Coiler, so we've talked about readiness states. We talked a little bit about Lua. Is there anything you can think of, Claire? I know we've kind of talked before, and I think I'm kind of coming up with a blank. I actually had a whole list of things in my head to talk about, but I'm just shooting blanks tonight. Sorry. Um, so you recently posted an article, I guess, about regaining your Lua skill. You want to go into some talk about that?
Well, it's basically I was having the same experience basically you did, um, in that I want to not just do scenarios myself that have Lua in them, but understand more advanced Lua more fully, so that way I can understand it and not just pass it off to someone who does know it. So if I can not just feel more comfortable doing small randomizing things, but just Lua in, but just feel comfortable being a Lua user in general, that'll help so I can understand what the background is and then I can do even more interesting things.
Alright, so it looks like my Eurofighters are up. Did I forget to launch the rest of Lakenhearth? Yep, I did forget to launch the rest of Lakenhearth's wing.